The spark in aisle 5. The supermarket was alive with the buzz of a typical Friday evening. Families pushed carts loaded with groceries for the week, workers restocked shelves, and the rhythmic beeping of cash registers created an oddly comforting melody. Among the crowd, Marcus Bailey, a 52-year-old retired Army officer, strolled through the aisles with practiced precision. His tall frame, honed from years of military service, moved with a quiet confidence as he navigated the store. Wearing a simple gray hoodie and jeans, Marcus blended into the sea of shoppers. He was a man of routine, molded by his years in uniform. Every Friday evening, he came to the local supermarket to stock up on his favorite essentials: almond milk for his morning shakes, fresh vegetables for his homemade meals, and occasionally, a bar of dark chocolate as a treat. Tonight was no different, or so he thought. As he turned into the produce section, scanning for fresh spinach, Marcus felt a peculiar sensation, an awareness honed through decades of leading troops in dangerous situations. Someone was watching him. Slowly, he glanced over his shoulder. A uniformed police officer stood near the end of the aisle, her hand casually resting near her holstered weapon. Her sharp gaze locked onto him, scrutinizing every move. Marcus suppressed the instinct to react. Years of experience taught him the value of measured responses. He nodded politely, a small gesture of acknowledgement, before returning his focus to the spinach. He placed the bundle in his cart and moved toward the dairy section. But the feeling didn't leave. Every few steps, he felt the weight of her stare. In the next aisle, he casually glanced at his reflection in a glass freezer door and confirmed his suspicion. She was following him. Her posture, her steady gaze. This wasn't a casual patrol or a coincidence. Marcus took a deep breath. Don't overthink it. He pushed his cart forward, determined to ignore her presence. But as he reached for a carton of almond milk, her voice sliced through the hum of the store. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone clipped and commanding. "I need to speak with you." Marcus turned to face her, his expression calm but questioning. "Yes, officer. Is there a problem?" Her eyes narrowed as she stepped closer. "We've received reports of suspicious activity in this area. May I ask what you're doing here?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, momentarily stunned. "I'm grocery shopping," he replied evenly, gesturing to his cart. "Is there something specific you need?" "I'm going to need to see some identification," she said, her tone brooking no argument. Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the demand. Identification. For buying groceries. He let out a small, incredulous laugh. "With all due respect, officer, I haven't done anything wrong. Is there a reason you're asking me for ID?" Her jaw tightened, and her hand shifted slightly toward her holster. The subtle movement sent a clear message: comply or escalate. "I'm not going to ask again," she said, her voice dropping to a sharp edge. "Show me your ID." The tension in the air thickened. Nearby shoppers slowed, their curiosity piqued by the officer's raised voice. Marcus noticed their stares, some curious, others concerned. He met her gaze, his own calm but firm. "Officer," he began, keeping his tone measured, "I've done nothing suspicious. If you have a specific accusation, I'd like to hear it. Otherwise, I'd like to continue shopping." Her eyes flared with irritation. "You've been wandering up and down the aisles, acting suspiciously. I need to confirm your identity." Marcus straightened, his military bearing unconsciously taking over. "I'm walking through a store, just like everyone else here. If that's suspicious, then perhaps we should talk about why you're targeting me." The officer's face reddened, and her voice grew louder. "Sir, don't make this harder than it needs to be. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have no choice but to take further action." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the growing absurdity of the situation. He raised his hand slightly, a gesture of de-escalation. "I'm cooperating, officer. I'm just asking for a little respect." But respect wasn't on the menu that evening. Her hand moved to unclip her holster, and the metallic click seemed to echo across the store. "Hands where I can see them," she barked. Now. The atmosphere shifted in an instant. Conversations died. Carts screeched to a halt, and a wave of stunned silence swept through the store. Marcus stood frozen, his hands raised, as the officer's hand hovered dangerously close to her weapon. "Officer, there's no need for this," he said calmly, though his heart pounded against his ribs. "I've done nothing wrong." "Get down on the ground," she ordered, her voice slicing through the quiet. Marcus hesitated. The humiliation of lying on the cold, dirty supermarket floor in front of a growing crowd of onlookers felt unbearable. He glanced around, meeting the shocked gazes of other shoppers. Some had already pulled out their phones, recording the unfolding scene. A mother shielded her child's eyes, while a middle-aged man muttered angrily under his breath. "Officer," Marcus said carefully, his voice steady despite the growing knot of frustration in his chest. "I'm a retired senior Army officer. I've served this country for over 20 years. I haven't done anything wrong. And I think you're making a mistake." Her eyes flickered with hesitation, but she quickly hardened her stance. "You don't get to decide that. Now get down." Reluctantly, Marcus sank to his knees, his movements slow and deliberate. The humiliation was palpable, but he knew better than to provoke further escalation. As he knelt, a man in the crowd stepped forward, his phone raised high. "Lady, what are you doing?" "He hasn't done anything," the man shouted. "Step back." The officer snapped, her eyes darting nervously toward the growing crowd. "This doesn't concern you." The man didn't budge. "It does when you're pointing a gun at someone for no reason. He's just shopping." The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, emboldened by the man's defiance. Voices began calling out in protest. "Let him go. This is wrong. Why are you targeting him?" The officer's grip faltered, her confidence visibly shaken by the mounting resistance. Marcus remained still, his hands raised, but his calm expression never wavered. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the noise. "Look around you. These people see what's happening. They know this isn't right." The officer's eyes darted to the crowd, then to the phones aimed squarely at her. Her hand trembled slightly, the weight of her authority slipping through her fingers. Marcus knew this was a pivotal moment. One wrong move, and the situation could spiral out of control. And then, a voice broke through the chaos. "What's going on here?" The store manager, a balding man with a name tag that read Paul, rushed toward the scene, flanked by a young security guard. Paul's wide eyes darted between the officer and Marcus, taking in the drawn weapon and the stunned crowd. "Officer," Paul said, his voice firm but calm, "what's happening here?" "This is a grocery store, not a crime scene." The officer straightened, her hand still on her gun. "Suspicious behavior. I have reason to believe he's shoplifting." Paul's brow furrowed, and he turned to the security guard. "Do we have anything on the cameras?" The guard shook his head. "No, sir. I've been watching the footage. He hasn't done anything. Just shopping." The officer's face darkened, her authority crumbling under the weight of the evidence. Marcus met her gaze, his voice steady but firm. "Do you see now? There was never a reason for this." The weight of authority. The tension in the store lingered, even after Marcus was allowed to rise from his humiliating position on the floor. The crowd's murmurs followed the officer as she briskly exited the store, her face a mask of rigid defiance. Marcus remained rooted in place for a moment, processing the whirlwind of emotions. Humiliation, anger, disbelief. They all churned in his chest, a tempest that threatened to spill over. Paul, the store manager, placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Mr. Bailey, I can't even begin to apologize for what just happened. I didn't expect this when I came over." Marcus turned to him, his expression calm but steely. "It's not your fault, Paul. But this isn't something that should happen. Not here. Not anywhere." Paul nodded, his gaze shifting to the growing crowd. "If you'd like to file a formal complaint or need access to our security footage, just say the word. I'll support you however I can." The security guard, Trevor, chimed in hesitantly. "Sir, I watched the whole thing on the monitors. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm really sorry you went through that." Marcus gave a faint smile. "Thanks, Trevor. I appreciate you speaking up. It means a lot." The crowd slowly began to disperse, but not before a few more people approached Marcus. A woman with a toddler on her hip reached out to touch his arm. "You handled that with so much grace. I don't know if I could have done the same." Marcus nodded politely, acknowledging her words but offering little else. He appreciated the support, but the weight of what had just transpired pressed heavily on his shoulders. As he returned to his car, the reality of the situation began to sink in. The encounter wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of something far more significant, a systemic problem that couldn't be ignored. Marcus had seen plenty of injustice in his lifetime, both during his military service and after. But this was personal. Later that evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the untouched almond milk and spinach from his shopping trip sitting off to the side. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Notifications from friends, family, and even strangers who had seen the videos circulating online. Clips of the incident were spreading rapidly, shared on social media platforms with captions like "Veteran harassed" while shopping, and "Another example of racial profiling in America." Marcus stared at the screen, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of viral outrage. He had been content to live a quiet life after retiring from the Army. His work in logistics kept him busy, and he enjoyed the simplicity of his routines. But now his name and face were plastered across the internet, and his phone was buzzing with requests for interviews and statements. He hesitated before opening a text from his niece, Zoe. She was a sharp, passionate law student who had always looked up to him. "Zoe, Uncle Marcus, I saw the video. Are you okay? You need to speak out about this. People need to hear your side." Marcus sighed deeply. Speaking out wasn't his style. He had spent a lifetime solving problems quietly, with as little fanfare as possible. But this wasn't just about him anymore. The way the crowd had rallied in his defense, the way strangers had recorded and shared the incident, it was a reminder that his voice carried weight. The next morning, Marcus's doorbell rang. He opened it to find Zoe standing there, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder and a determined look on her face. "Morning, Uncle Marcus," she said, stepping inside before he could protest. "We need to talk." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Good morning to you too. What's this about?" Zoe set her bag on the kitchen table and pulled out her laptop. "This is about the video. It's everywhere. People are outraged. But outrage fades. If you don't do something now, this moment will pass without making any real impact." Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. "And what exactly do you think I should do, Zoe?" She leaned forward, her intensity palpable. "You need to tell your story. Not just to the people in that supermarket, but to everyone who's ever faced something like this. You've got credibility, your service, your leadership, your integrity. People will listen to you." Marcus took a sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "Zoe, I didn't ask for this. I'm not an activist. I'm just a man trying to live his life." "But you didn't ask for that officer to point a gun at you either," Zoe shot back. "You were minding your own business, and she made you a target. You have a chance to turn this into something meaningful." Her words hung in the air, and Marcus couldn't deny their truth. He had spent years leading troops, making decisions under pressure, and fighting for principles larger than himself. Maybe this moment was no different. By afternoon, Marcus had made up his mind. With Zoe's help, he crafted a thoughtful statement. It wasn't about anger or retribution. It was about accountability and change. He wanted to use his experience to shine a light on the broader issues of racial bias and systemic injustice. When he posted the statement on his social media accounts, it garnered an immediate response. Messages of support poured in from veterans, community leaders, and everyday people who resonated with his words. The media quickly picked up on his statement, and requests for interviews flooded his inbox. Marcus agreed to a sit-down with a respected national news anchor, understanding that this was an opportunity to reach a wider audience. The interview aired that evening. Dressed in a simple suit, Marcus sat across from the anchor, his posture straight and his tone measured. "Mr. Bailey," the anchor began, "thank you for joining us. Your story has captured the nation's attention. Can you tell us how you're feeling in the aftermath of the incident?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm feeling a lot of things. Frustration, certainly. Humiliation, yes. But also determination. What happened to me wasn't just about one officer or one moment. It's part of a much larger issue that we need to address as a society." The anchor nodded. "Many people have praised your composure during the incident. What was going through your mind in that moment?" "I was thinking about how quickly things could have gone wrong," Marcus admitted. "I've been in high-pressure situations before, but this was different. This was in a place where people should feel safe. I was thinking about the families in that store, the children watching, and the need to stay calm for their sake as much as mine." When asked about the public reaction, Marcus chose his words carefully. "I'm grateful for the support I've received, but this isn't just about me. It's about everyone who has faced this kind of profiling and didn't have a crowd with phones to hold people accountable. We need to look at the systems that allow this to happen and ask ourselves how we can do better." As the interview concluded, Marcus felt a mix of relief and resolve. He hadn't sought the spotlight, but now that it was on him, he intended to use it wisely. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The firestorm. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Sacramento sky in shades of orange and pink, but Marcus Bailey's day was far from over. The fallout from the supermarket incident had snowballed into something much larger than he ever anticipated. The quiet, structured life he had carefully built after retiring from the military was now overshadowed by a media frenzy. His phone buzzed relentlessly, emails poured in, and his social media notifications refused to stop. By the time Marcus sat down in his living room, exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders. The television flickered with a news broadcast, and he stared at his own face on the screen. The anchor's voice recounted the events of the supermarket encounter in somber tones. Clips of the officer pointing her gun at him played on a loop, paired with commentary about racial profiling, abuse of power, and the growing calls for accountability. Zoe, who had stationed herself at Marcus's dining table with her laptop, looked up from her screen. "Uncle Marcus, your story is everywhere. People are talking about it in every corner of the internet." Marcus sighed, leaning back on his couch. "That's not exactly comforting, Zoe." She closed her laptop and walked over to him, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "I get it. You didn't ask for this. But it's happening whether you want it to or not. People are looking to you as a symbol of strength and resilience." "I'm not a symbol," Marcus replied, his voice tinged with weariness. "I'm just a man who wanted to buy some groceries without being treated like a criminal." Zoe sat beside him, her tone softening. "I know, but symbols have power, Uncle Marcus. You have a voice, and people are ready to listen. That's a rare thing." Meanwhile, the internet was ablaze with debates and discussions about the incident. The video, which had been shared millions of times, sparked outrage across the nation. News outlets dissected every second of the footage, while social media users flooded platforms with hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #EndRacialProfiling. Activists, veterans, and public figures weighed in, demanding accountability not just for the officer involved, but for the broader system that allowed such incidents to persist. As the pressure mounted, the Sacramento Police Department released a brief statement. It acknowledged the incident and confirmed that the officer, identified as Patricia Monroe, had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. The department's attempt to downplay the situation only fueled public anger. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters, chanting slogans like "Accountability now" and "Justice for Marcus Bailey." Marcus's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unfamiliar number. He hesitated before answering. "Mr. Bailey, this is Amanda Carter from the Sacramento Herald. I'm reaching out for a comment on the incident at the supermarket." "I'm not giving interviews right now," Marcus replied curtly. "I understand," Amanda said, her tone professional but persistent. "But the public is rallying behind you. Your story has ignited a national conversation, and people want to hear your perspective. This could be an opportunity to—" Marcus cut her off. "An opportunity to what?" "To be paraded around as the latest example of what's wrong with this country." "I didn't ask for this attention, Ms. Carter." Amanda paused before responding. "I understand that this must be overwhelming. But if I may, your voice could help spark real change. This isn't just about you. It's about everyone who's ever been in your shoes." Marcus remained silent for a moment before responding. "Thank you for reaching out, but I'm not ready to speak publicly right now." He ended the call and tossed the phone onto the couch beside him. Zoe looked at him, her expression a mix of sympathy and frustration. "You know she's right, don't you?" Zoe said gently. "This isn't just about what happened to you. It's about what this represents." Marcus rubbed his temples. "I know, but I need time to think. I can't just jump into this without knowing what I'm getting into." The next morning, Marcus woke to find a dozen more interview requests in his inbox, along with messages from friends, family, and even strangers. Many were supportive, while others were filled with vitriol. The incident had struck a nerve, and the backlash was as polarizing as it was widespread. Later that day, Marcus received a call from an unexpected source. A fellow veteran named Colonel Elijah Harris, someone he had served under during his early years in the military. Elijah was now a prominent advocate for veterans' rights and a well-respected figure in the community. "Marcus," Elijah said, his deep voice steady and reassuring, "I saw the news. First off, I want to say I'm proud of how you handled yourself. That couldn't have been easy." "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied, his respect for the older man evident in his tone. "I've been thinking," Elijah continued, "this isn't just a one-off incident. It's part of a larger problem. And you, whether you like it or not, are in a position to shine a light on that." Marcus sighed. "You sound like my niece. Everyone keeps telling me I need to speak out." "She's a smart girl," Elijah said with a chuckle. "But listen, I'm not saying you have to become the face of a movement overnight. Just think about how your story could help others. You've always been a leader, Marcus. That hasn't changed." The call left Marcus deep in thought. Elijah's words carried weight, and for the first time, Marcus began to see the potential impact of his voice. But the question remained, was he ready to step into such a public role? That evening, Marcus sat down with Zoe to draft a more formal response. Together, they crafted a statement that balanced his personal experience with a broader call for accountability and systemic change. He shared the statement on his social media accounts, and within hours, it had gone viral. The post read, "What happened to me at the supermarket was humiliating and frustrating, but it was not unique. Too many people face similar experiences every day, often without the benefit of cameras or a crowd to hold people accountable. This isn't just about one officer's actions. It's about a system that allows bias to fester and grow. I am grateful for the outpouring of support I've received, but my hope is that this moment can lead to meaningful change. We need to do better, as individuals, as communities, and as a nation." The response was overwhelming. Messages of support flooded in, along with stories from others who had experienced similar encounters. Marcus read each message, his resolve strengthening with every word. By the end of the week, Marcus agreed to participate in a community town hall organized by local activists. The event was intended to address issues of racial profiling and law enforcement accountability, and Marcus was invited to share his story. As he stood before a packed auditorium, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. He adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady despite the nervous energy in the room. "My name is Marcus Bailey. I'm a retired Army officer, a son, a brother, and a member of this community. And a few days ago, I found myself at the center of something I never expected." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "What happened to me wasn't just about one officer or one moment. It's part of a much larger issue, an issue that we, as a society, have to confront head-on. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who has ever been judged, targeted, or humiliated because of the way they look." The crowd erupted into applause, and Marcus felt a surge of confidence. This wasn't the path he had envisioned for himself, but it was one he couldn't ignore. The firestorm had begun, and Marcus Bailey was determined to turn it into a force for change. Rallying the community. The town hall event marked a turning point for Marcus Bailey. Standing in front of a packed auditorium, he had felt the energy of the room. Anger, frustration, and a desperate longing for change. His speech had been met with overwhelming applause, and people from all walks of life had approached him afterward to share their own experiences, offer support, and ask how they could help. The stories he heard were heartbreaking, a reminder of how widespread the problem was. Now, back in the quiet of his living room, Marcus sat at his dining table, a mug of coffee growing cold beside him. Zoe was seated across from him, her laptop open, and her fingers flying over the keyboard. "They're calling you a hero," Zoe said, glancing up from the screen. "Social media is blowing up with posts about the town hall. People are tagging you left and right." Marcus shook his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I'm no hero, Zoe. I just spoke the truth. That's what people needed to hear." Zoe leaned forward, her eyes alight with determination. "That's exactly why people are listening to you. You're not trying to be something you're not. You're just real, and that's what makes you powerful." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression contemplative. "It's a strange feeling, being thrust into the spotlight like this. I've always believed in leading from the front, but this is a whole new battlefield." Zoe closed her laptop and crossed her arms on the table. "You've been on battlefields before, Uncle Marcus. You've led troops under fire. This is just another kind of fight." Marcus looked at her, appreciating her faith in him. "You're right. But this time, the stakes are higher. This isn't just about me or the people who were in that store. This is about changing the way we think, act, and treat each other as a society." The next morning, Marcus's phone buzzed with a call from a representative of a local advocacy group, the Sacramento Justice Alliance. The group had been organizing protests and community events in the wake of his incident, and they wanted him to join them as a keynote speaker at an upcoming rally. "It's going to be our biggest event yet," the organizer, Maria Alvarez, explained. "We've got over 2,000 people confirmed to attend, and the media will be there in full force. Your voice could make a real impact." Marcus hesitated. He had never imagined himself as a public speaker or an activist, but he couldn't ignore the momentum building around him. "I'll do it," he said finally, his voice steady. "Let me know when and where." The rally was held in a sprawling park in downtown Sacramento. The stage was set against the backdrop of a massive banner that read "Justice for All. End racial profiling now." The crowd was even larger than Marcus had anticipated. Families, students, veterans, activists, and community leaders filled the park, holding signs and chanting slogans. As Marcus stood backstage, waiting for his turn to speak, Maria approached him with a warm smile. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, adjusting the microphone clipped to his jacket. Maria patted his shoulder. "You've got this. Just speak from the heart." When Marcus stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. He paused for a moment, taking in the sea of faces before him. The sheer scale of the gathering was humbling, but it also filled him with a sense of purpose. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Thank you for being here today. It's a privilege to stand before you, not just as a speaker, but as a member of this community. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. A few days ago, I found myself in a situation I never expected. I was in a supermarket, doing something as ordinary as buying groceries, when I was accused, judged, and humiliated, simply because of the way I look. That experience was painful, but it wasn't unique. It's a reality that far too many people face every day. The crowd murmured in agreement, their attention locked on him. I've served this country for over 20 years, Marcus continued. I've led troops in combat, faced danger head-on, and worked to protect the freedoms we all hold dear. But even with all that, I was reduced to a suspect in the eyes of someone who didn't know me, someone who let bias cloud their judgment. He paused, letting his words sink in. This isn't about one officer or one incident. It's about a system that allows this kind of bias to persist. It's about a culture that tolerates injustice. And it's about the countless lives that are impacted by these moments, big and small. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the park. Marcus waited for the noise to die down before continuing. We're here today because we believe in something better. We believe in accountability, fairness, and the dignity of every human being. We believe that no one should have to live in fear of being judged or targeted because of their race, their background, or the color of their skin. He leaned into the microphone, his voice firm. But belief isn't enough. Change doesn't happen on its own. It takes action. It takes courage. And it takes all of us standing together, refusing to accept anything less than justice. The crowd roared, their energy fueling Marcus's resolve. So I'm asking you, he said, his voice rising, to take this energy, this passion, and channel it into something bigger. Call out injustice when you see it. Support organizations that are fighting for change. And most importantly, vote for leaders who will uphold the values we believe in. As he finished, the crowd erupted into a standing ovation. Marcus stepped back from the microphone, overwhelmed by the response. Maria met him as he exited the stage, her eyes shining with pride. You were incredible, she said. I think you just gave people a reason to hope. That evening, Marcus returned home to find his inbox flooded with messages from people who had attended the rally or watched it online. Veterans, activists, and ordinary citizens shared their stories, their gratitude, and their determination to keep fighting for change. One message stood out, a letter from a young black man named Jamal. It read, Mr. Bailey, I watched your speech today, and it gave me hope. I've been targeted and profiled more times than I can count, and it's made me feel like I don't belong in my own community. But hearing you speak reminded me that I'm not alone. Thank you for standing up for people like me. Marcus stared at the screen, the weight of Jamal's words sinking in. He had never sought this role, but now that he was in it, he couldn't turn away. This fight wasn't just his. It belonged to everyone who believed in a better, fairer world, and he was ready to lead it. The system fights back. The aftermath of Marcus Bailey's rally sent shockwaves through Sacramento and beyond. Videos of his speech spread rapidly across social media, amassing millions of views and inspiring conversations in households, schools, and workplaces. People praised his calm yet powerful message, and calls for systemic reform grew louder. But not everyone celebrated his newfound voice. In the days following the rally, Marcus began receiving troubling messages. Among the supportive emails and heartfelt stories were harsh criticisms, thinly veiled threats, and accusations of being anti-police. Marcus wasn't surprised. He knew that challenging the status quo always came with resistance. What did surprise him, however, was how quickly the system itself began to push back. One morning, as Marcus sipped his coffee and read through the latest headlines, his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. "This is Marcus Bailey," he answered. "Mr. Bailey, this is Detective Rachel Simmons from the Sacramento Police Department. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss the recent incident at the supermarket." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowing. "I've already provided my account of the incident. What exactly is this meeting about?" There was a pause on the other end before Simmons replied. The department is conducting a thorough review of Officer Monroe's actions. We believe it would be beneficial to have your input as part of the investigation. Marcus didn't miss the carefully neutral tone in her voice. He had no illusions about the department's intentions. This wasn't about justice. It was damage control. Still, he agreed to meet, recognizing an opportunity to address the deeper issues at play. The meeting was held at the police department's headquarters, a stark, imposing building that loomed over the busy downtown streets. Marcus arrived early, dressed in a tailored suit that exuded quiet confidence. Zoe had insisted on coming with him, and though Marcus initially resisted, he was grateful for her unwavering support. They were ushered into a sterile conference room, where Detective Simmons and a few other officers waited. Simmons, a woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor, extended a hand. "Mr. Bailey, thank you for coming," she said. "This is Lieutenant Harris and Captain Moreno. They're part of our internal review board." Marcus nodded, shaking their hands. "I hope this meeting is about more than just appearances," he said, his tone even. "The public deserves accountability." Simmons gestured for him to sit. "That's exactly why we're here." The conversation started civilly enough. Simmons asked Marcus to recount the events of that night in detail, and he obliged, careful to remain factual and composed. But as the questions continued, their tone began to shift. "Mr. Bailey," Lieutenant Harris said, his voice measured, "you've gained a significant following since this incident. Are you concerned that your public statements could incite anti-police sentiment?" Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. "My statements are about accountability, not hatred. If holding people to a higher standard is seen as anti-police, then perhaps we need to reevaluate our expectations." Captain Moreno leaned forward. "Do you believe Officer Monroe's actions were indicative of a systemic issue, or do you think this was an isolated incident?" "I believe both can be true," Marcus replied. "Officer Monroe's actions were her own, but they were enabled by a system that tolerates bias and excessive force. Addressing her behavior without addressing the system would be like treating a symptom while ignoring the disease." The room fell silent for a moment, tension crackling in the air. Simmons cleared her throat. "We appreciate your candor, Mr. Bailey. Rest assured, the department is committed to conducting a fair and thorough investigation." Marcus met her gaze, unflinching. "I'll hold you to that." Outside the headquarters, Zoe paced the sidewalk, her frustration bubbling over. "That was a joke," she fumed. "They weren't interested in accountability. They were trying to shift the blame onto you." Marcus placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "I expected that. They're protecting their own. But the important thing is that we keep the pressure on." As they walked to his car, Marcus's phone buzzed with another call, this time from Maria Alvarez, the organizer of the rally. "Marcus, I need to warn you," Maria said, her voice urgent. "I just got word that certain groups are planning counter-protests. They're targeting you specifically, claiming you're stirring division." "Counter-protests," Marcus repeated, his jaw tightening. "Yes, and there's more. Some local politicians are speaking out against the movement, saying it's undermining law enforcement. They're calling for an end to the rallies." Marcus sighed heavily. The backlash wasn't unexpected, but it was exhausting. "Thanks for the heads up, Maria. I'll be careful." "You're not alone in this, Marcus," Maria assured him. "We're with you all the way." Over the next few days, the opposition grew louder. Counter-protesters began showing up at events, waving signs that read, "Support our police," and "Stop dividing America." On local news stations, pundits debated Marcus's motives, with some accusing him of seeking fame or vilifying law enforcement. But Marcus refused to back down. He continued attending rallies, meeting with community leaders, and speaking out. Each time he stepped onto a stage or into a room filled with supporters, he felt the weight of their expectations and their hope. One evening, after a particularly heated rally, Marcus returned home to find an envelope taped to his front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the words, "Stop now, or else." Marcus stared at the note, his expression unreadable. He folded it carefully and placed it on the kitchen counter. When Zoe saw it, her face turned pale. "Uncle Marcus, this is serious," she said. "We need to report this to the police." Marcus shook his head. "The police are the ones I'm challenging. Do you really think they'll take this seriously?" Zoe crossed her arms, her eyes blazing with determination. "Then we'll make it public. Whoever did this needs to know they can't scare you into silence." The next morning, Marcus held a press conference on the steps of City Hall. Flanked by Zoe, Maria, and other community leaders, he addressed the growing threats and backlash. "I will not be intimidated," Marcus declared, holding up the threatening note for the cameras. "The fight for justice and accountability is too important to be derailed by fear. This is not just about me. It's about creating a better future for all of us." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the city streets. Marcus felt a surge of resolve. The system was pushing back, but so was he. And he wasn't alone. As the press conference ended, Marcus looked out at the crowd, seeing not just allies but a movement. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they were stronger than the forces that sought to silence them. Together, they would endure. Triumph and transformation. The days following Marcus Bailey's defiant press conference were a whirlwind of action. The note threatening him, now a public symbol of resistance, only galvanized the movement further. News outlets played clips of Marcus holding the note high, his voice firm, as he declared he would not be silenced. Social media exploded with hashtags like #WestEndWithMarcus and #JusticeForAll. It was clear to everyone watching. Marcus had become more than a symbol. He was now a catalyst for change. 1 week later, Marcus found himself seated at a long table in a crowded city council chamber. The room was packed with supporters, activists, and community leaders, all gathered for a hearing on police accountability. The council had been forced to address the issue after relentless public pressure, and Marcus had been invited to testify. Zoe sat beside him, her laptop open and ready to take notes. Maria Alvarez and several other prominent figures from the Sacramento Justice Alliance were also in attendance. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. As the council president called the meeting to order, Marcus felt a sense of purpose settle over him. When his name was called, he stood and approached the microphone. "Good evening," Marcus began, his voice steady but powerful. "My name is Marcus Bailey. I am a retired senior Army officer, a resident of this city, and unfortunately, the victim of an incident that never should have happened." He paused, scanning the faces of the council members. "What happened to me at that supermarket was not just about one officer's actions. It was about a system that has failed to hold itself accountable, a system that has allowed bias, injustice, and abuse to flourish unchecked." The room was silent, every ear tuned to his words. "I am not here to vilify law enforcement," Marcus continued. "I served this country for over 20 years, and I know the value of discipline, integrity, and accountability. But I also know that power without oversight is dangerous. And when that power is wielded against the very people it's meant to protect, it undermines the trust that binds us as a community." He went on to detail his experience, not just at the supermarket, but throughout his life. He shared stories of bias he had encountered while in uniform, of moments when his loyalty and service were questioned simply because of the color of his skin. His voice never wavered, but the emotion behind his words was undeniable. "This isn't just about me," Marcus concluded. "It's about ensuring that no one else has to endure what I did. It's about building a system that serves and protects everyone equally. And it's about making sure that justice isn't just an ideal we talk about, but a reality we live every day." When he finished, the room erupted into applause. The council members, some of whom had seemed skeptical at the start, now looked visibly moved. Marcus returned to his seat, and Zoe gave him a small, proud smile. The hearing marked a turning point. Over the following weeks, the City Council introduced a series of reforms, including mandatory bias training for officers, the establishment of a civilian oversight board, and stricter protocols for use of force incidents. These measures weren't perfect, and Marcus knew they were just the beginning, but they were a step in the right direction. Meanwhile, the Sacramento Justice Alliance continued to grow, attracting supporters from across the country. Marcus became a central figure in the movement, using his platform to advocate for broader reforms at the state and national levels. He traveled to other cities, meeting with activists, lawmakers, and community leaders, always carrying the same message: change is possible, but only if we work for it together. One day, several months after the supermarket incident, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. The governor of California wanted to meet with him to discuss statewide police reforms. Marcus accepted, recognizing the opportunity to push for systemic change on a larger scale. The meeting took place in the governor's office, a grand room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The governor, a pragmatic and widely respected leader, greeted Marcus warmly. "Mr. Bailey," the governor said, shaking his hand, "thank you for coming. Your story has had a profound impact, not just here in Sacramento but across the state. I want to hear your thoughts on how we can do better." For the next 2 hours, Marcus outlined his vision for reform, drawing from his own experiences and the insights he had gained from working with activists and community leaders. He emphasized the need for transparency, accountability, and community engagement, as well as the importance of addressing the root causes of bias and inequality. The governor listened intently, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. By the end of the meeting, he had pledged to support several key initiatives, including a statewide oversight commission and increased funding for community programs aimed at building trust between law enforcement and the public. As Marcus left the governor's office, he felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a deep sense of responsibility. The fight was far from over, and he knew there would be setbacks and resistance. But for the first time, he also saw tangible progress, a glimpse of the change he had been fighting for. When he returned home that evening, Zoe was waiting for him with a grin. "You're trending again," she said, holding up her phone. "People are calling you a modern-day hero." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm no hero, Zoe. I'm just doing what needs to be done." "That's what makes you one," she replied, her voice soft. Months turned into a year, and Marcus's life took on a new rhythm. He continued to speak, advocate, and work with communities, always mindful of the platform he had been given. The supermarket incident, though painful, had become a catalyst for something much larger, a movement that extended far beyond Sacramento. Through it all, Marcus remained grounded. He still shopped at the same supermarket, still lived in the same modest home, and still found time to enjoy the quiet moments of life. But now, when he walked through the aisles, he was greeted with nods, handshakes, and words of gratitude from strangers who saw him not just as a man, but as a symbol of resilience and hope. As Marcus reflected on everything that had happened, he realized something profound. Change wasn't just about laws or policies. It was about people, ordinary people standing together, speaking out, and refusing to accept the status quo. It was about turning pain into progress and building a future where everyone, regardless of their background, could walk through a supermarket, or anywhere else, without fear or suspicion. And as he looked ahead, Marcus knew one thing for certain. The fight for justice was far from over, but he was ready to see it through.